Hey everyone, it's Elena. Welcome back to What Was Meant. Before I get into today's video, I want to say something. I don't normally discuss politics on this channel, and that's intentional. This space is about healing, not headlines. But what we're watching unfold right now in the United States is something I can't stay silent about because it's not just politics, it's a pattern. And it's one that every survivor of a narcissistic family will recognize. So I felt it was necessary to do this video as a learning tool because we're all watching this play out in real time. And I believe that this perspective of survivors is not just relevant, it's essential. If you grew up in a narcissistic family, your lived experience gives you a unique lens on what's happening in the US today. You don't need a political analyst to explain it to you. You don't need a think tank or a panel of experts. You recognize it in your body before your brain catches up. The gaslighting, the loyalty tests, the scapegoating, the way abusers are protected while victims are left exposed, the way dissent is treated like betrayal, the way cruelty gets rebranded as strength. You've seen the enforcers, you've seen the enablers, you've watched someone carry out the dirty work and get praised for it right up until they became inconvenient and then watched them get discarded overnight. Not because the cruelty went too far, but because the attention got uncomfortable. You lived this system before it had a cabinet. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how the current administration in the US government mimics the narcissistic family system. Not to make you feel helpless, not to pull you back into the darkness, but because once you can name the pattern, it loses its power over you. You've already survived the prototype. This is just the scaled up version. Let's break it down. Section 1, the family roles. Every narcissistic family has a structure. It's not random, and even though it might feel chaotic on the surface, there's an order to it. There are roles, and every person in the family is assigned one. You don't get to choose, you get cast. And if you step out of your role, you get punished. The system depends on everyone staying in their lane. Sound familiar? Let me show you who's who. The malignant narcissist father. In the narcissistic family, this is the person at the top, the one who demands absolute loyalty, the one who rewrites history while you're still standing in the wreckage, the one who says that never happened and you're making it up, and if you tell anyone, you'll regret it. On the national stage, this is the president, the one who fires anyone who embarrasses him, not anyone who harms the people, the one who retaliates against perceived enemies. Former intelligence officials had their security clearances stripped. A Federal Reserve governor was investigated. A former FBI director was prosecuted. A retired Navy captain was censured for speaking out. Each time, officials insisted these actions were driven by law, not politics. But the pattern tells a different story. Human Rights Watch, in their 2026 World Report, described what's happening as a, quote, decided shift toward authoritarianism, unquote, driven by scapegoating, retaliation against perceived enemies, and attempts to neutralize democratic checks and balances. If you grew up with a malignant narcissist father, none of this surprises you. You've seen this man before. He just didn't have a podium. The covert narcissist enabler. In the narcissistic family, this is typically the covertly narcissistic mother. She manages the narrative. She plays the role of the reasonable one. She tells the neighbors everything is fine. She protects the father's image while quietly making sure the truth stays buried. On the national stage, this role belongs to the Attorney General. Right out the gate, she promised transparency with the Epstein files. In February 2025, she told the public the client list was sitting on her desk. But months later, her Department of Justice announced there was no incriminating client list. That's a direct contradiction of her own public statements. But here's what's worse. When the files were released, bipartisan lawmakers discovered that the names of alleged co-conspirators were redacted, while survivors' names and photographs were left exposed. The very people who were harmed were put at risk, while the people who did the harm were shielded. Ahead of the Attorney General's testimony before Congress last month, survivors wrote a letter calling the Department of Justice's handling of the Epstein files, quote, reckless and dangerous, unquote. They said it sent a message that reporting abuse will not protect you, it will only expose you. And during the Attorney General's congressional testimony, when she was asked to turn and acknowledge the survivors who were sitting right there in the room, she refused to look at them or even acknowledge their existence. If you grew up with a covertly narcissistic mother, you recognize this immediately. The performance of concern, the careful management of what gets revealed and what gets buried, the unapologetic and blatant failure to protect the most vulnerable while shielding the abusers, the discarded enforcer and the replacement. In a narcissistic family, enforcers, also known as the narcissistic father's lackeys, are useful until they're not. They carry out his dirty work. They act as the police of the dysfunctional system, maintaining the required reality, secrets, and public image while doing the things the father doesn't want his fingerprints on. And as long as they stick to the father's plan, they're praised. But the moment they become a liability, the moment they draw the wrong kind of attention, they're out. Not because the behavior was wrong, he's fine with that, but because the attention was unwanted. Last week, the Secretary of Homeland Security was fired. Under her leadership, 2 U.S. citizens were killed by federal immigration officers. She labeled them domestic terrorists before any investigation. She fabricated stories to dehumanize immigrants. She oversaw an agency accused of using white nationalist recruitment messaging. None of that got her fired. What got her fired was a $220 million taxpayer-funded ad campaign that featured her as a star, most notably riding horseback in cowboy gear near Mount Rushmore.
I'm Kristi Noem.
Sources say the breaking point for President Trump when it came to Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was this $220 million taxpayer-funded ad campaign featuring Noem galloping near Mount Rushmore.
But it wasn't just the ad. Throughout her tenure, she made herself the constant face of the department, posing in military fatigues and combat helmets, wearing Border Patrol bomber jackets for TV interviews, and even filming inside of a notorious foreign prison. The no-bid contracts for the ad campaign were awarded to a company formed just 11 days before receiving nearly $143 million, with much of the money flowing to a firm run by the spouse of her own spokesperson. When Congress asked about it, she said the president approved it. He said he never knew anything about it. And in the same announcement that removed her, he praised her for her spectacular results. If you grew up with a malignant narcissist father, you know this move. The enforcer is praised until they embarrass the father, steal some of the spotlight, or both. Then the story changes. I never approved that. That was her decision. The enforcer takes the blame. The father's hands stay clean. And then comes the replacement. The new nominee is a senator from Oklahoma who in a single week confused Iran with Iraq on live television, called the defense secretary President Hegseth twice, and described the, quote, smell of war in your nostrils, unquote, despite having no military service. He claims to be a former undefeated MMA fighter, but MMA databases only show 3 professional fights, all against the same low-level opponents, with a combined fight time of less than 10 minutes. He tried to start a fist fight during a Senate hearing in 2023.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big
Oh,
guy.
stop it.
Is that your solution every
Hold it. No, sit down. Sit down.
Look at you.
You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
All right.
He likes to project toughness. But here's how the tough guy reacted when the Capitol was breached on January 6th. Reports say the president chose him largely because he likes watching him on TV. In the narcissistic family, you know this person. He's the uncle or the brother who steps into the enforcer role. Not because he's smarter or more qualified, but because he's more loyal and less self-aware. He says the quiet part out loud without realizing what he just said.
To leadership.
This is war, and we're taking out the threat. And if you're part of the threat, then you're a target.
You'll concede this is war.
We haven't declared war. They declared war on us, but we haven't.
War, Secretary Hegseth.
Senator,
we
when
haven't
you
declared.
just now, you
yeah.
said this is war.
They've called it war.
They've called it war. What I was saying.
you just-
Okay, well that was a misspoke. What I was saying that they've declared war on us, but war is ugly. It always has been ugly.
And that's exactly why the father chose him. Not in spite of the incompetence, because of it. A competent enforcer might develop their own agenda. An incompetent one never will. The system doesn't change, only the face does. The scapegoat. In the narcissistic family, the scapegoat absorbs all the blame, carries all the shame, and is used to deflect from the real dysfunction. Everything that goes wrong gets placed on their shoulders, and anyone who defends them becomes the next target. On the national stage, immigrants and communities of color have been cast in the role of the scapegoat. Non-white people who have earned positions of responsibility through merit and hard work have been dismissed as DEI hires by members of an administration that has appointed people to positions they are wholly unqualified for. During the 2024 election, Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, were falsely accused of stealing and eating people's cats and dogs.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there.
Both the president and vice president amplified this debunked lie to an audience of millions. And when confronted, the vice president admitted he was willing to, quote, create stories to get media attention. The baseless claims led to bomb threats, school evacuations, and a wave of racist harassment directed at the Haitian community. PolitiFact named it the lie of the year for 2024. Just last week, a WhatsApp group chat run by the secretary of the Miami-Dade Republican Party was exposed. The participants used racial slurs over 400 times, fantasized in graphic detail about murdering black people, joked about gas chambers and rape, and praised Hitler so regularly that the chat was renamed after what one member called Nazi heaven. When a nearly identical chat among young Republicans was exposed last fall, Vice President J.D. Vance dismissed it as, quote, kids telling stupid jokes, unquote, despite the participants being adults in their 20s and 30s. In Minneapolis, a federal operation called Metro Surge sent thousands of agents into a single metropolitan area. 2 U.S. citizens were killed by federal immigration officers. Agents raided the wrong homes. U.S. citizens were detained without cause, some let out of their homes at gunpoint in sub-freezing conditions.
They pointed a gun to me and my daughter-in-law, and then they told me to come out here without my clothes on. I was short only, and then they just handcuffed me right there. And then when they took me out there, my grandson was picking on the window.
Many of the immigrants swept up in mass deportations had no criminal record and were deported to countries they had no connection to. The Lumpkin Institute for Genocide Prevention has stated that these mass deportation operations could amount to crimes against humanity and may be evidence of a genocidal process targeting Black and Brown communities. If you were the scapegoat in your family, you understand what it means to be blamed for everything while the real dysfunction goes unaddressed. You understand what it's like to be told you deserve what's happening to you. And you understand that a major function of the scapegoat is to serve as a common enemy to distract from the shit show actually playing out in the abusive family, or in the case of this administration, on the world stage. The golden child. In the narcissistic family, the golden child is the one who can do no wrong. They're elevated, praised, and protected, not because they're exceptional, but because they serve the narcissist image. Their role is to reflect the father's greatness back to him. In return, they receive preferential treatment, and they learn early on that their safety depends on never challenging the one who elevated them. In my family of origin, this was my brother, someone who knew exactly who my father was and what he was doing, and chose to assist him anyway in exchange for that protected status. On the national stage, you see this in the cabinet members and allies who are rewarded for their loyalty with positions, praise, and proximity to power. They parrot the talking points. They defend the indefensible. And the moment they stop performing, they get the same treatment the enforcer got, discarded and replaced. The lost child. In the narcissistic family, the lost child is the one who sees the dysfunction clearly, but keeps going back. They'll call you and rant about how terrible the parents are. They'll acknowledge the damage. They'll even agree with you. But then they return to the fold every single time because the pull of the system is stronger than their clarity. In my family of origin, this was my younger sister. On the national stage, you see this in figures like the vice president, who in 2016 called the president America's Hitler, reprehensible, and cultural heroine, and now serves as his most vocal defender and echo chamber. Or the Secretary of State, who publicly clashed with and criticized the president during his first term, and now carries out his foreign policy without question. These are people who saw the dysfunction, named it, and then walked right back into the house. They traded their clarity for proximity to power. You'll recognize them immediately because many of you have a version of this person in your own family. The flying monkeys. In the narcissistic family, the flying monkeys are the extended family, the church members, the neighbors, the friends, the people outside the immediate household who carry out the narcissist agenda. They pressure the scapegoat to reconcile. They spread the narcissist version of events. They enforce the silence. They aren't delivering the abuse directly, but they make it possible by providing cover and legitimacy. On the national stage, the flying monkeys are Congress and the courts. The legislative branch was designed to be a check on the executive, the way extended families should function as a safety net for the children in an abusive home. Instead, much of Congress has become a rubber stamp, advancing the president's agenda without question, punishing members of its own body who dissent, and pursuing his perceived enemies on his behalf. And it's not just one party. Some Democrats have quietly fallen in line as well, choosing alignment over accountability. The Supreme Court, which is supposed to serve as the ultimate check on executive overreach, has largely supported the administration's objectives as well. In the narcissistic family, this is the equivalent of the pastor or the family doctor who sees the bruises and says nothing. And then there's the media. The press is supposed to hold power accountable the way a teacher or a counselor is supposed to report what they see. But when the major outlets are owned by billionaires who largely support this administration, the reporting often falls in line. They sane-wash what should alarm people. They soften language that should be direct. They frame cruelty as controversy and authoritarianism as unconventional leadership. In the narcissistic family, this is a neighbor who hears the screaming through the walls and tells themselves it's none of their business. If you grew up in a narcissistic family, you know that the flying monkeys, Congress, the courts, the media, often do more lasting damage than the narcissist himself because they were the ones you expected to help. Section 2, the tactics. Tactic 1, gaslighting. In the narcissistic family, that didn't happen, and if it did, it wasn't that bad, and if it was, it's your fault. On the national stage, the administration promised to drain the swamp and increase government efficiency, then dismantled agencies like USAID, gutted consumer protections, and fired the inspectors general whose job was to hold the government accountable. 2 million federal workers received mass emails with thinly veiled threats pressuring them to resign. When challenged, the administration called it streamlining. The administration told the public it was waging a war on illegal immigration to protect American families, while pulling FBI agents off drug smuggling, child exploitation, and human trafficking cases to conduct immigration raids instead. Your family did this to you too. They told you one thing and did another, and when you pointed out the contradiction, they told you that you were the problem. The scale is different. The tactic is identical. Tactic 2, protecting abusers while exposing victims. In the narcissistic family, your parents told you not to talk about what happened, but they broadcast your private business and perceived failures to anyone who would listen. The abuser's reputation was sacred. Yours was expendable. On the national stage, the president pardoned over 1,500 January 6 rioters on his first day back in office, including individuals with prior convictions for rape, child sexual abuse, domestic violence, and manslaughter.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages. Approximately 1,500 for a pardon.
Yes.
Full pardon. Hope they get him. We hope they come out tonight, frankly.
He called them great people and hostages. Meanwhile, the prosecutors and FBI agents who investigated the attack were fired, and some now face threats of violence from the very people they helped convict. One pardoned rioter was later sentenced to life in prison for sexually abusing children after his release. The administration also gutted federal whistleblower protections, making it easier to retaliate against government employees who report wrongdoing. The people who broke the law were freed. The people who upheld it were punished. That's not accountability. That's a language of an enabler, explaining why the abuser's comfort mattered more than the victim's safety. Tactic 3, punishing dissent. In the narcissistic family, if you tell anyone, there will be consequences. On the national stage, the administration issued executive orders targeting law firms that had represented clients or causes the president didn't like, stripping their lawyers of security clearances, banning them from federal buildings, and threatening their government contracts. A federal judge said the orders sent the message that lawyers must stick to the party line or else. Another judge called it a personal vendetta. Universities that didn't comply with the administration's demands had their funding threatened. Federal workers who raised concerns were pushed out. And just last week, Republican members of Congress referred a former White House aide to the Department of Justice for criminal charges because she testified about the president's role in January 6th. Congress isn't serving as a check on the executive. It's serving as an enforcer for it. Every survivor of a narcissistic family knows this math. You learn it young. Telling the truth costs more than keeping quiet until the day you realize that keeping quiet is costing you everything. Tactic 4, cruelty as credential. In the narcissistic family, the father who beats his children calls it discipline. The mother who withholds love calls it character building. Cruelty is reframed as strength, and anyone who flinches is told they're weak. On the national stage, the administration sent immigrants to a notorious foreign prison where they were subjected to conditions that have been described as torture. Aggression is rewarded. Empathy is mocked. Tenderness is treated as weakness. If you grew up in a narcissistic family, you already know this equation by heart. Tactic 5, the discard and replace. In the narcissistic family, when an enabler or enforcer starts creating problems, the narcissist doesn't reform the system, they swap the person. A new step-parent, a new pastor, a new family friend who slides into the role of the last person vacated. The abuse continues with a fresh coat of plausible deniability. On the national stage, the DHS secretary was removed and immediately replaced with someone with a record of embarrassing public gaffes and a lack of any relevant experience. One senator said the rot in DHS is deep, much deeper than any individual. It's a question of policy, not personnel. He's right, and every survivor knows it. Changing the person doesn't change the system. The abusive parent relies on the system to perpetuate their abuse. The people are just the instruments. Tactic 6, the family myth. In the narcissistic family. We're family. We don't air dirty laundry. What happens in this house stays in this house. On the national stage, patriotism becomes a silencing mechanism. Dissent becomes disloyalty. Asking questions becomes un-American. The message is the same as it was at your family's dinner table. Silence is loyalty. Truth is betrayal. And if you break ranks, you will be punished. Section 3, the animal cruelty connection. I need to talk about something that might seem like a side note, but it's not. It's a through line. My father was cruel to animals. Multiple times throughout my childhood, I witnessed him harm or threaten the animals in our home. When I was 6 years old, he pulled a gun on our family dog, a Great Dane named Aaron, and threatened to shoot him because he was barking. There were other incidents I won't go into today, but the pattern was clear. He treated vulnerable, innocent animals as disposable. He used his power over them to demonstrate control, to frighten us, and to remind everyone in that house that nothing was safe from him. That's what a narcissistic system does. It treats the vulnerable as instruments, not beings, and it punishes anyone who tries to intervene. There's a long tradition in the United States where presidential families have a pet, most often a dog. It's a small thing, but it signals something about how a leader relates to the living beings in their care, who depend on them for safety and love. The current president has no pet. What he does have is a former cabinet member who bragged in a book about shooting her 14-month-old puppy and killing a family goat in a rage.
A 14-month-old dog is basically a teenager in dog years. You decided to kill that dog because you had not invested the appropriate time in training, and then you have the audacity to go into a book and say it's a leadership lesson about tough choices.
He didn't disqualify her for that. He rewarded her with one of the most prominent positions in his administration, putting her in charge of an agency responsible for protecting people. People who normalize cruelty toward the vulnerable in private will institutionalize it in public. And people who reward cruelty as leadership will always eventually turn that cruelty on the people they claim to protect. That is not a political opinion. That is a pattern. And it's one that every survivor of a narcissistic family has seen play out before. Section 4, why survivors see it first. Here's what I need you to hear. If you've been watching what's happening and feeling like you're going crazy, you're not. If you've been telling people, this is what my family was like, and they look at you like you're being dramatic, you're not being dramatic. You're being accurate. Survivors of narcissistic families have a gift that nobody asked for. You learn to read micro-expressions before you could read books. You learn to track the mood of a room before you understood politics. You learn that words and actions don't always match, and that the gap between them is where the danger lives. You knew the Secretary of Homeland Security was finished the moment she embarrassed the men at the top. Not because you follow politics, because you've watched your family do the exact same thing to the person who carried out the dirty work and then became inconvenient. You recognize the gaslighting in the Epstein Files coverage before the journalist named it, because you grew up in a house where the story changed every time you tried to tell the truth. You are not paranoid, you are experienced. And that experience is not a liability, it's a lens. It's the thing that allows you to see what others are only beginning to notice. And this is important. No matter what country you're watching this from, whether you're in the US or the UK or Brazil or the Philippines or Hungary, you recognize this system because narcissistic families and authoritarian governments run on the same operating system. The roles, the tactics, the punishment for truth, the reward for silence. It's universal, and so is your ability to see through it. Section 5, the path forward. So what do we do with this? I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. That's not what this channel is about. But I am going to tell you what the scapegoat knows that nobody else in the family does. And I'm going to tell you how to use it. First, name the system. That's what we just did. When you can identify the roles and the tactics, the fog starts to lift. Gaslighting only works when you don't know what's happening. Once you can see the pattern, you're no longer inside it. You're observing it. And observation is the first act of freedom. Second, refuse to be gaslit. Trust what you see, not what they tell you to see. When the story changes between Monday and Friday, when the praise turns to a discard overnight, when victims' names are exposed while abusers' names are redacted, trust your own perception. You spent your childhood being told that your reality wasn't real. You don't have to accept that anymore. Third, watch the system, not the face. When they swap out the enforcer, don't be distracted. The person is replaceable. The pattern is the point. A new face on the same system is not reform, it's rotation. You've seen your family do this. Don't fall for it at the national level. Fourth, protect your peace. You do not have to re-engage with the abuser to be free of them. You do not have to watch every news cycle, doom scroll every update, or let the national dysfunction pull you back into a trauma response. Set your boundaries with information the same way you set them with your family of origin. Stay informed, stay clear-eyed, but do not let this system re-traumatize you. You've already done the hardest version of this work. Fifth, build your chosen family. Community is the antidote to isolation, and isolation is the narcissistic system's most powerful tool. Whether it's your family of origin or your government, the goal is the same. Keep you alone, keep you doubting, keep you silent. The antidote is connection. Find your people, build your table. That's not weakness, that's strategy. 6, use your voice. Vote, organize, speak, show up. The adult version of leaving the house is participating in the systems that were designed to protect you, even when those systems feel broken, especially when those systems feel broken, because the narcissistic family taught you that your voice doesn't matter. And every time you use it anyway, you prove that that was a lie. And remember this, the scapegoat is the one who got out. You are not the broken one. You are the one who saw clearly enough to leave. That is not weakness. That is survival intelligence, and is exactly what this moment requires. I started this channel because of a verse, Genesis 50, verse 20. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. That verse is not about pretending the harm didn't happen. It's about refusing to let it be the end of the story. What was meant to destroy you, whether it came from your father or your mother or your government, you are transmuting into something that helps others see clearly. We are not powerless children anymore. We are adults who have already survived the hardest version of this. We have the tools, we have the pattern recognition, and we have each other. And if you're watching this from the outside, if you didn't grow up in an abusive home, but you're starting to feel like something isn't right in the country or the world around you, listen to the survivors. We've been studying for this test our entire lives. If this video resonated with you or helped clarify something you've been feeling but couldn't quite name, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if something in this video hit home for you, drop it in the comments. You never know who's scrolling through those comments right now feeling alone, and your words might be the thing that helps them realize they're not. Again, my name is Elena, and this is What Was Meant. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.